Well, let's get started with the final panel of the day. And again, for those of you that have been here throughout the day, thank you so much for coming and participating with our first Olin Sports Business Summit. We're ending the day on a local note. And so with that said, the blue note, I'd like to first introduce the owner of the St. Louis Blues, Tom Stillman. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
The president of the St. Louis Cardinals, Bill Dewitt III. Thanks, Bill. The Chief Operating Officer of the St. Louis Rams, Kevin Demoff. Thanks, Kevin. And last but not least, Tom Ackerman, Sports Director at KMOX Radio here in St. Louis. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Let me go there. Over here.
The show is yours.
Fantastic. Well, hello, welcome, and thank you for being here on a beautiful Friday afternoon here on the campus of Washington University. I am very happy to be here, and I'm very happy that these three gentlemen have joined us here today. And you know, let's start closest here, Tom Stillman, the Blues owner. I mean, here we go. Hockey season is officially underway. Preseason game, already you have 3 under your belt. You had the split squad game on Tuesday where you went to Columbus and played in St. Louis, and then last night a 6-0 win over the Dallas Stars at Scott Trade Center.
Yeah, it's been a fun start. I mean, preseason games, you take them for what they are, but it's a great chance to see some of your young players and to see some new combinations of veterans and young guys. So it's been a very good start.
Bill DeWitt III, we were just checking the score of the Pirates-Cubs game, just sneaking a peek at the score at Wrigley. Right now the Pirates lead 2-1, but they are threatening in the top of the 8th. The magic number is 6 to clinch the NL Central, an exciting time for your team with 9 games to go.
Yeah, it's crunch time, and we like our position. I don't think Mike is looking ahead. He's really good at keeping guys just focused on today's game, and trying to whittle away at the division lead. And, you know, if you had to script it, you'd want things to come down to the end and win, of course. But, you know, I think you look at what Kansas City just clinched yesterday, and they've got almost 3 weeks until their first playoff game. Now, they got to run out the season, and they'll get their work in. But that would make me a little nervous to be sitting that long, because baseball is such a game of the day-to-day flow and so forth. So, you know, hopefully if we can kind of script this thing, we'll clinch next week and be off to the races in the playoffs.
Kevin Demoff, we were just talking out in the hallway about the difference between a baseball season and a football season. Boy, the pressure is on every Sunday for your team. You win a thriller of a game against the Seahawks and then come back the next week, go to Washington and lose. Now the Pittsburgh Steelers are coming in, and here we are. Every game day is a dramatic day.
Well, that's what makes the NFL great, and when you follow it, you combine it, as Tom said, through preseason, there are all these storylines, and everybody thinks these teams are going to win the Super Bowl. They all lose week 1. Week 2, almost everybody flipped exactly what happened. You know, week 1, you have 5 playoff teams from a year ago that are 0-2. You know, and so I think this year you're seeing a lot of different jockeying. I think there's great parity in the league, which means that every game is going to be, you know, special and different. And when you get a team like Pittsburgh, the best offense in the NFL right now, coming in, they get one of their best players back. Strength against strength, our defense. You hope that it matches up, but every week, when you have a week, we were talking about this, a week to speculate on what you do great and what you do wrong, you know, depends on whether you won or lost. And, you know, we didn't play well last week, but I think the great thing for our team is with a young team, you go up, you go down. They were very focused this week, engaged out in. They looked the same way they did against Seattle, and hopefully that means the same result Sunday.
It has been now for a year, Kevin, rampant, speaking of speculation, about where this team is going to play next year. How does that change and affect your approach as you work this season through?
I'm not familiar with what speculation you're talking about. You know, I think for us, you know, one of the great things is you got to Seattle is it reminded people of what the games actually are. I mean, you go 9 months, you know, without playing a football game, and everybody talks about the offseason, it's so long, what happens? Then you go and you beat Seattle, and it reminds everybody about the power of the NFL, what the games mean, how it can bring people together, and the uniqueness of Sundays. And it's not to take away from hockey or baseball, because we're talking about 8 home games. each year and the power and what each of those games mean. And when you beat a Seattle, what that can do for a community and the vibe. And I think for our building, what's been great is getting back to football and having the chance each week. But the problem is you beat Seattle and everybody's on a high, and it means great things. You beat Pittsburgh and you lose to Washington, and you guys are terrible, you're tanking, and I think what gets lost is the players, the coaches, they tune all of it out. For the staff, it's more, how do we deliver the same experience to fans each time, and to show people our commitment to making sure that this year is better than 14 and better than 13. I think people felt that way against Seattle, but it's really managing a building through some of the uncertainty. But I think the game is what people care about, and it's what can change, and I think that's the exciting part for the next few months.
True. At the same time, your customer base, your fan base goes through a lot. On one hand, they see you excited about playing in the Dome and playing in St. Louis, and then they see, and it's very public, the NFL owners' meetings, they see you walking through a hallway with Stan Kroenke about to give a presentation about a Los Angeles stadium. For fans, that's a very difficult thing to go through, is it not?
I think it's impossible. I think as fans, I don't know how our fans manage through that emotional process. And I'm sure Bill and Tom, everything you do as a sports team is to build emotional connections with your fan base, to try to work hard each night, whether it's in games or Sundays or in the off season, to strengthen that, because that's what people care about. Win or lose, they want to be entertained, they want to have an emotional connection, they want to be about something bigger than yourself. And so when you go through this process, everything you've worked to do for us for the previous 6 years since I've been here, you're severing in one quick knife motion. And that's really hard for us. And I think it's no different when you look at, and this is on a bigger scale, holdouts, lockouts, labor strike. Fans hate seeing the business of sports. They just hate it. And every time people talk about it, people can say, oh, it's the business of sports, which sounds fine if you actually work in it. But if you're a fan and you're the customer and you're driving the entire business, it should be about you. And I think for me, the hardest part this year is we have so many fans who I feel like we're letting down just by being in the process, no matter what the outcome is. They feel different about this team today than they did a year ago. And that's really hard, to fathom that you're partly responsible for that.
Really a general question, just going down the line, starting with Kevin. St. Louis as a major sports market, how do you see it? How does it stack up against others around the country?
I think where you start is hardcore, passionate market. Fans are terrific, I think, for all three teams. Every team has a great core base. I always say what makes a great sports market is a thriving city. The health of a city drives the health of a sports market, and you can always have the outliers. And I think when you look at, to me, this market comparable sports-wise, we're talking about Pittsburgh, whether it's the Steelers or the Pirates, it's a Pittsburgh market. A Cleveland, the passion for the teams, the way it resonates, a Buffalo, a Detroit. I think those are the groups that I look at comparison-wise of how it is, just the passion and what people do, the hardcore. How you grow, though, I think is what's important for all three of us as we look forward for our franchises. How you continue to grow the market and make it better. And, the one thing, and I can say this right here, it's been widely reported in Chicago that we stood up and said St. Louis doesn't work for us. We never said that. I don't know why that was speculated. I don't know who planted it. We've never said that at all. It's not that St. Louis doesn't work for us. It's how do we all come together to build a better city, which I think makes all three of our teams thrive and grow.
Bill?
We look at the market in a unique way, because I think the way the Cardinals have evolved over time in St. Louis through their long history, we benefit from a few factors. One is we were the westernmost team for a number of years. We had that great KMOX radio reach. And we still have a wide swath of Cardinal-friendly territory beyond the 100-mile radius that has those historical fans in it who travel during the summer months and watch our games, and they visit the Arch. And to Kevin's point there, experiencing St. Louis as a tourism city. So we view it as a great market. It's just so in terms of its pure demo. You've got its 24th largest media market by DMA in baseball. If you Google it, it's like 21st, but you got two in LA, Chicago, and New York, and then Toronto. But it has a unique characteristic that I think we've been able to take advantage of, which is that broad geographic territory that we can draw from based on that historical connection with our fans.
I think what distinguishes St. Louis is the rapidness of its fans, especially the core fans. As Kevin says, that emotional attachment. And, I guess maybe every city sees that in itself, but it seems to me that attachment here is so strong, and there are so many people that have that to more than one team. I mean, I think we saw that the other night with the Blues night at Busch Stadium, where you had, mixed fans, Cardinals, Blues fans, who, very tied to both. But I just can't tell you how many times I've had people come up to me and tell me about how their son is named Barkley after Barclay Plager, or their father was buried in his Blues jersey, and it's really striking. Now, I mean, the challenge is to grow from that core and take in the next concentric circle of fans, and that's what we're working to do. But I think it is a market in which fans become very attached to their teams. It's important.
Yeah, how do you do that? You capture the youth of St. Louis and the surrounding area and try to grow those fans into Blues fans?
I think you do that, and a number of other things that Chris Zimmerman is leading, and a lot of those are with new content that we're providing that gives people closer touches with the organization, greater access to kind of inside the locker room, inside the tunnels, what's really going on, a more personal and up-close look at players and coaches. Those sorts of things establish an emotional attachment. And then, obviously, your play on the ice. You hope that is winning, but it's also playing hard, it's showing grit, showing hard things, entertaining hockey. So it's all those things.
Bill Dewitt, a big hockey fan, and you've actually held some hockey events right there in Ballpark Village. I mean, you've had the big start of the season for them to get their fan base going right in the middle of it. In fact, Cardinals Nation, you changed the lights to blue, and everything was about. How do you work with this team, and how do you view this St. Louis Blues team?
Well, it's a great complementary fit in terms of the seasons. I mean, winter and summer, a little bit of overlap, but I think we're thankful that the Blues like to partner on stuff, because we feel like we're tapping into their passion that Tom alluded to when we have Blues night at Busch Stadium, and that's a nice seller for us on that night. And then we reciprocate, and it's just fun. I mean, I think our fans, and I think we'd love to do that more with the Rams too. I think our fans appreciate, and they've said so to me on many occasions, it's cool what you guys do with the Blues. Because, look, if you grew up in St. Louis, you're a fan of all three almost by default. And it's not the sense that they're competing, tooth and nail for that entertainment dollar that can only be cut in a zero-sum game. So we think it's fun. And, another thing that we'd love to partner with them on is a winter game in Busch Stadium. And so we've both of us have been sort of working the back channels to see if we could try to get that happening. It's happened in a number of markets. They've been very popular. We think if we can pull it off, it'd be very popular in St. Louis.
Kevin, how do you view these two franchises?
I think, you love partnering with them in different ways. Unfortunately, the NFL rules and regulations for what we can do partnering with teams are more rigid than baseball. So, I mean, you look at the Kurt Warner Day, the Cardinals held with Kurt and Christian Family Day, where we swapped uniforms and hats. You try to figure out ways you can work with each in unique ways. We held our draft day party at Ballpark Village this year. The overlap winds up being, as strong as you can. It's actually harder with Tom's club because our players gone from January through May. And I think we always want to try to find ways. And I think for me, my grandparents lived here. They were the 7th season ticket holders to the Blues, and the Blues, started up. I mean, they were passionate Cardinals fans. So it's always a way to try to tie those together, because I think that's what fans expect from us. And I think it's what they expect from all three teams. I think they expect people to come together and work together and find solutions. One of the best days, and it's ironic, we were 0-6 in 2011. The Cardinals win the World Series. They start their parade. We host the team against the Saints that day in our building before the parade kicks off. Biggest upset 538 has it as the biggest upset in the NFL in like the last 5 years. All the energy of their team being on the field, being introduced before our game. So I think those always remind me of the unique ways you can build together, and partner. But most of all, I think, the other thing, our players are all friendly off the ice, off the field. They interact. Yesterday, I saw a picture of Roddy McLeod taking batting practice, down with the Cardinals. I know David Backus and James Leonidas are close. I think that's one way that our fans, again, expect people to partner and really see how it can come together, because it's all, in our fans' minds, they're all St. Louis athletes, no matter what colors they wear.
We have the owner of the Blues here. Bill, your father is the chairman of the Cardinals. And Kevin, in fairness, we just don't know a lot about Stan Kroenke. We don't hear from him. He doesn't make big, grand public appearances. He's not walking through the concourse, high-fiving fans. How much of a challenge is that for your brand, and why doesn't he interact more?
I think as a challenge for the brand, I think Dave Peacock's is best. People don't come to support an owner not against either of these people here, right? If you win, people view the prism of your organization through wins and losses. So I think in the NFL for a long time, if you were Dan Snyder or Jerry Jones and you were ever present, not winning, people viewed as a negative. I think that's how people view owners in sports. The opposite, I think as long as you win and you deliver a quality product, that's how people judge owners. Do they spend? Are they committed? Do they deliver a good product? It's the hallmark of an organization. I think for us, and I think unfairly for Stan, we haven't won. We've gone through a couple of struggles with the relocation issue. So the things that people would judge an owner on 1, 2, we've probably come up short in both elements. I think how people view him. I think if you look at, success he's had in Colorado with the Avalanche winning a Stanley Cup, the success he's had at Arsenal winning the last 2 FA Cups in the Champions League, people view everything through the prism of whether you're winning or losing. I think, I've been to games, watched Tom Worth Concourse, I see Bill there. I think it's a different style. And I think in St. Louis it is important. I think there's an element of the personification. But, in the NFL, it goes back to you play 1 game a week. About half the owners in the NFL don't even live in the cities that they exist, and they fly in for the games, they fly out. I think what's most important, I always view it in Stan got the team in 2010, whether he was a minority owner before, he was able to go out and recruit the highest profile head coach in Jeff Fisher right away. We've spent the most against the salary cap the past 3 years. We have a great young team. If you took away the relocation aspect, I think people would think much differently, but that's going to cloud everything. And I think, quite frankly, people always say, we want to hear Stan speak. I think people want to hear Stan say what they want to hear him say. And if you can't deliver that exactly, then you're trying to hide a different message and you're trying to look at it from a different viewpoint. I think if Stan came out and said, I'm going to see how this process plays out, which is how he feels, I don't think that would give people comfort. I think people would rather hear him say, I'm committed to St. Louis. I'm going to do everything I can to make it work. And, only at that point am I going to look. I think, quite frankly, then the end result is how people judge. And I think Bill went through that with a high-profile player who said everything there was to say that people wanted to hear. And then at the end, it didn't work out. And I think there's an honesty to Stan that he wants to go through the process and say, I never want to mislead anybody. I don't want it to be difficult. And at the end, we'll see how the chips fall. But I think, quite frankly, if you look at the product on the field, the commitment to winning, that's where he should be judged. Everything else, if the organization falls short, I'll take the responsibility for that.
Bill, if they go to Los Angeles, or for that matter, if any NFL team leaves the market, but here in St. Louis, how does that impact the business here and yours specifically?
I've said a few times, I think that it would be marginally beneficial on a corporate sponsorship sales sort of point of view, but that's really not something that we would look forward to doing. We'd love for the Rams to stay. I think it's great for St. Louis. All the ways in which that could happen is sort of for someone else to decide, but I think St. Louis can support 3 teams, and I hope they stay.
Tom, same question.
People say this to me. Oh, wouldn't it be great for you? I don't see it that way. I suppose short term there could be some gain because some dollars become available. Long term, I think a departure is not good for St. Louis, and if it's not good for St. Louis, it's not good for the Blues. I think anything that makes our city more vibrant and more up to date, and more on the radar across the country is good for the market and therefore good for the Blues. So we don't want to see a departure.
What sort of challenges do you face, Tom, in terms of dollars, keeping that payroll where you want it to be and bringing in revenue to keep yourself moving forward?
Well, it's sort of a constant race, and the goalposts or the goal keeps moving because we have a salary cap, but it tends to move up every year, and we are going to chain to the bumper of these very large market teams. Almost all the Canadian teams do very well. Then you've got New York and Boston and others. And they have so much, whether it's pricing power or the ability to add new sponsorship offerings and all sorts of things, that revenue is going to keep growing, and the league's doing well. That pulls the salary cap, and then we have to keep up with that. So we have to keep offering. We do have to continue to raise prices, or else we just won't be able to have a team. But we also have to add new sponsors, new partners, and that means adding new product and inventory, and that becomes more intangible inventory rather than a sign in the rafters. But it's a constant battle.
Bill, how do you accomplish it? Everybody is raving about. And in some cases, the Cardinals' rivals are like, how? Who in the world are these players? How does this continue to happen? How are the Cardinals successful all the time? But there is also an underlying engine, isn't there, of revenue that you're able to do and make big signings if you need to?
Yeah, the lifeblood of any pro sports team is the player development pipeline. And because, you know the free agent market's out there to supplement, but if you're trying to fill more than a couple holes, you're in trouble. And we've seen big markets attempt time and again to fill multiple or high percentage of the roster with it, and it just collapses under its own weight almost always. So it's just the key to our business. Obviously, my role on mostly the business side is to make sure that engine keeps going on, sales, corporate sponsorships, key partnerships, our development across the street, stadium operations, and the Busch Stadium experience. But it's really that, and we're proud of some of those things, obviously, but the true engine is the player development pipeline, and that's what we've been very good at over the last decade, and a lot of focus and energy on trying to maintain that advantage that we've enjoyed.
You have the youngest team in the NFL. Again, the draft becomes of the utmost importance, but also those players that just make the 53-man cut are extremely important, aren't they?
Well, I think when you look at, it's hard to imagine. We beat Seattle opening week in overtime. An undrafted free agent, Bradley Marquez, makes the catch on the onside kick, has the presence of mind to call for a fair catch. That's a kid playing in his first game in the NFL. I think these guys hit it. Player development, youth is key because it allows you to plan years in advance. Once you get the control and you understand when these guys are going to be up for contract, when you're going to have to pay them, how you structure everything else in your organization comes off of knowing, when these players are going to start to get paid, when they're going to hit more. One of the things when Jeff and Les came here, with a commitment to getting young, we went out and spent a bunch of money in free agency because we had so many holes to fill. But you want to wean yourself off of that. And we always say free agents are free for a reason. And especially in the NFL, these guys don't have the luxury of having a franchise tag. I'm sure they wish they very much did. But the players who get free in the NFL, usually you're making a mistake by signing them. You're either overpaying them or you're guessing about their potential that they haven't showed some way, somehow. You know your own players best. And so I think when you get into the draft, you can go find the kinds of talent that fit what you're doing, that you understand, how they're going to grow. You can be patient. But it's also every year finding that undrafted free agent who's going to contribute for 2 or 3 years. I think if you look at our Seattle and Benny Cunningham, 122 total yards, undrafted free agent. Bradley Marquez, undrafted free agent. You get a Rodney McLeod coming in and playing. Johnny Hecker. You get some key guys from that back part. And that's been huge as we've then looked and said, okay, you're going to have the Robert Quinns, who you're going to go have to pay, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't worry about how much Aaron Donald's going to make 4 years from now, which is a great problem to have. But that means at some point 4 years from now, you're going to have 2 or 3 undrafted free agents come up and make a difference, probably the same way these guys think about Tarasenko or some of the pitching talent.
A couple more and maybe one more, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So we do have about 15 or so minutes still remaining. So if you have a couple of questions, hang tight. I wanted to talk about facilities. So Tom, Scottrade Center is 20 years old, 20 plus. How is the building right now? Are you satisfied, and how do you continue to improve it?
What you'll see around the league, in both the NHL and the NBA, is that arenas around the 20-year mark tend to go through a major renovation. And that is going to be necessary at Scottrade Center, and probably more necessary there than in some arenas, because over the years, the franchise has not exactly been awash in cash. And therefore, the maintenance, the CapEx over the years haven't been, what it should have been. So we are kind of in the early stages of planning a renovation and figuring out what that means and what has to be done. Obviously part of the aim there is to make it, the best possible home for the Blues and NHL hockey. But it's also, Scottrade Center plays a key role in bringing other events to St. Louis. And I don't mean only, major concerts, but a lot of NCAA events with the help of Frank Viverito and the Sports Commission, big tournaments, the SEC tournament, the NBC tournament, NCAA, March Madness, and other events. And if we're not going to continue to attract those events unless we do upgrade the arena significantly. So we're in the process of starting to plan that.
And Busch Stadium, which is also an event space, but for 81 home games a year and perhaps a maximum of 12 postseason games, you're a baseball venue, and then you add, and this is the second year of Ballpark Village. It's hard to believe, by the way, this is a 10th season in that new stadium. The 10th season at Busch Stadium 3. How do you view your ballpark right now and moving into the future, the next phase of Ballpark Village, perhaps?
We feel good about it. Obviously, it's still, the 10-year mark brings with it certain milestones. We're going to replace our scoreboards next year and upgrade them to high def and some other things, which is pretty expensive. We continue to invest a lot in the ballpark every year. Last couple of years, we've been averaging $10 million of our own money to put in there. And I don't see that abating. So we're committed. We own it. It's like our living room. So we're keeping it up. And then Ballpark Village is probably the area where hopefully we'll see more activity in the future within the next few years. We have a phase 2 that we're planning right now that would include some residential rental units, perhaps a little additional retail, maybe even a hotel, maybe some office. It's taking form right now, but we're in the early stages of that. We know, and by intent, we led off with our mixed-use, high-energy, game day experience, off-season event spaces and retail concepts. And now we want to really build the village part of it. And so that's what we're planning. It's never easy to develop in downtown urban cores, but knock on wood, we'll have something to announce here in a year or so.
And Kevin, the Edward Jones Dome, also 20 years old. We know that story up and down. Your stadium that's being discussed doesn't exist. It's a proposed riverfront stadium on the North Riverfront. You also have proposed, it's out there, a palace in Inglewood that everybody has seen pictures of that too. What does St. Louis have to do to keep the Rams here with this new stadium?
We can't just open it up for other questions now. I think as you look at, I think there are a lot of different moving parts. I always say as you get into the economics of stadiums, and I think you saw some of it, CapEx, who's responsible for it, what the design costs are. How do you envision stadiums of the future? And I think one of the things that I look at both as we go through the design process, whether it's in St. Louis or whether it's in Los Angeles, is how people consume the games and attend the games is changing. And to me, you talk about a high-def scoreboard, when I look at what happens at Edward Jones Dome now, it's not just reinventing stadiums, it's trying to predict 6 years from now, 8 years from now, the technology, the way people are going to gather. I think the trend in all sports is all these party spaces and microbrews and reconforming suites because people don't buy as many suites. And so when you go and design a riverfront stadium with 117 suites, is that the right number, for St. Louis or for any market? And, what's going to compel someone to buy a suite versus buying tickets? How do you make a club space, successful? And I think for the riverfront, it's no different than what Tom talked about a little bit about, Bill talked about Ballpark Village. It can't be 10 days a year. And I think as we've gone through this process, if you're building any NFL stadium for 10 days a year, you're making a huge mistake. And it's just too big of an expense. You have to find a way to get energy in that building and to design it so that it can be successful, for other events and to be used in other ways. But as you get into that, it's what's the standing room only capacity? Can it expand? Can it contract? Can you be open 365 days a year with a restaurant? What events can you attract? I think for all of those, to me, it is the most important thing here is not just about building a new stadium for us. It's about expanding how we grow and compete. I think as Bill talked about, when you're in the third quartile of the market, how do you outperform? How do you find ways to outperform your market? Not just on wins and losses, because I think anybody could build a new stadium and say, well, if we go 16-0, we'll sell out, we'll be great. That's not, unfortunately, winning isn't a strategy. It's great. You always have to plan, though, if you could go 8-8. So to me, it's how does a new stadium contribute to make St. Louis a better, more vibrant place? How does it deliver revenue streams that we don't currently have? And how do those become sustainable? So in 20 years, you're not sitting here with a building that is outdated and your revenue streams are gone and your market remains the same. And that's where I think the growth of a stadium platform and the growth of the market at some point have to merge to create something greater than what you have now.
I want to open it up to questions, but first a round of applause for our panelists. Questions for Kevin, Bill, and Tom. First one's always the toughest one. Questions? Questions. Did I ask them all? Did I ask every question there was to be asked? Any questions about what you heard today? Any follow-ups to that? Yes, sir.
With respect to the new football stadium that's been proposed, it's an open-air stadium. So how do you square that with this need for more than 8 or 10 events? It would seem to me a retractable or something of that sort would have to be employed.
It's a great question. And I think what you're looking at is what's available in the marketplace. I think in new open-air stadium, a lot of talk about soccer and those events. Frank and I have worked tirelessly to bring college football, games here, bowl games, kickoff events. I think you could look at a lot of those bigger concerts right now that, for the most part, skip St. Louis because we don't have a 60,000, 70,000 person venue, and there's a limited amount of time you can get into Busch Stadium for concerts. I think that's how you score it away. Now, obviously, a retractable roof. Over the past few years, when I've asked people, what would you want, indoor, outdoor, everybody says, well, we want a retractable roof. Well, it's about $250 million of added costs. So you've got to go figure out, can you get a return on that? What events will come in? What is different, though, is this would be the first city to go from indoor to outdoor since Seattle did it, going from the Kingdome to Quest Field. And so it's unknown kind of how you do that, what you can go compete events for. But I think one of the reasons I give them a lot of credit for the design is they're trying to marry it not as much as a sporting venue, but a downtown upgrade, partnering with City Arch River, making it a riverfront redevelopment, parking, parks, trails, so that on non-game days, I think that it can add to the vibrancy of living downtown and working downtown, and maybe that's a little bit more of the reward than the roof would bring.
Questions? Yes.
Cardinals recently bought the Memphis Redbirds, and then more like 10 years ago, the Springfield Cardinals. Can you talk a little bit about the business decision there, the pros and cons, and if that is a trend across MLB with the farm system?
I think you've seen it a little bit more, but we're probably unique, I think, in baseball for owning our AAA, AA, and single A franchises, single A being in Jupiter. where our spring training is. But really, all three of those deals were opportunistic based on something that we felt would work for us at the time, as opposed to when we got involved, hey, let's have this master strategy of owning and operating our minor league teams. Springfield, for example, 10 years ago was an opportunity to relocate to a new stadium where somebody was willing to build a stadium in that city and bring a team, and he loved the Cardinals. It was John Q. Hammonds, who's passed recently, but he's a big civic guy in Springfield. And so that worked for us. Memphis as well, we were kind of kicking the tires for a number of years. The one thing we like about Memphis and Springfield strategically is that they're a drive, you get in the car and you're 5 hours or whatever from there. And that's nice from a player development, back and forth, coaching, scouting, back and forth type of deal. They don't have to get on a plane for the most part. And so that's nice. It also is, they're all peripheral in our market. So we feel like both of those markets were, somewhat Cardinal and perhaps other team affiliated. We think those locations and having a team locks down those being Cardinal markets. So strategic, opportunistic, but not part of a master plan. As it turns out, we've done some things that make it seem like it was thought of well in advance, with some promotional things that we do and some human resources and personnel stuff that have made it interesting and efficient, but more just as a serendipitous opportunity thing that worked out in all three cases.
We have time for a couple more. Other questions? Yes.
I guess we're all concerned about Yachty. And in terms of the future, like in the pipeline for catchers, I mean, it seems like he's breaking down a little bit. I'm just wondering, in the pipeline for catchers, can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, we're, catcher is one of the hardest positions to develop because, for one, they're sort of more rare. I don't really know the reason behind that, but, they constantly have health issues. And Yachty's durability actually has been one of his amazing strengths. He lost a lot of weight last offseason, just to address the durability issue. And he did have once again, played in 1 million games this year. He should be back for the playoffs, but you never know. He's kind of on hold and locked down with his thumb. But in terms of development, one of the challenges is when you have a catcher, a primary catcher, there are very few really good catchers that want to be a backup catcher. It's kind of like a quarterback in the NFL. It's really hard to have two good ones, because if you've really got a good backup, he's probably going to go somewhere else or get tempted, or you're going to get value for trading him and so forth. So similar to a catcher, and that's why it's hard to develop really high-end and preserve high-end talent at the major league level. But we have a couple coming. There's a good one in single A. We think there's some serviceable guys, double and triple A, over the next few years if Yachty takes more time off.
By the way, bottom of the ninth, 1 out, and the Cubs have a runner at second. They're down 3-1, but they brought the tying run to the plate in Starlin Castro. So let's go. Do we have a few more minutes? Any others? I know you were thinking of one, but you're not sure. This is your time. This is your moment. Yes.
We have a lot of students from Washington University in the crowd, and I'd just like to get your opinion about people at entry level or the internship level, advice, strategy for breaking into the St. Louis market or other sports industries.
Tom, you want to handle that one?
I just, the best way is to come and knock on the door and make clear that you're interested. I would not recommend leading with this statement, I've always been a big X fan. It's more this, I'm really interested in this area of business, and here's what I can do, and here's what I'm good at. I think, and it's great to have the passion that goes with that, but that doesn't distinguish somebody. It's, it's energy, it's intelligence, it's creativity, industriousness and showing that more than anything.
I would jump in and say that if I were a student at a sports business program today, I would look at the entire landscape of sports, which is big. If you look at just 120 pro teams in the main 4 sports, there's just so many positions. But if you look at all the suppliers, all the technology companies now servicing, all the league offices, which have grown much faster than actual teams over the last decade, it starts to now look like a pretty big business. And so I would, and to be geographically flexible when you look at that whole universe, would be something I would suggest. And there's some publications that I saw Eric Fisher out here earlier, writer for Sports Business Weekly. That's a nice publication that gives a sense of the breadth of the industry and what's hot, what's happening, where the new companies emerging to serve the sports industry.
Yeah, I think the follow-up to that is do what you're passionate about. I once had a person ask me, they said, I want to get into baseball in Boston. I said, well, call the Red Sox. They were looking for help. I think I always say, you look at the breadth of the opportunity, but there are a few things. Also, if there's a sport that you love, that's where you should put your first focus on and be geographically flexible. I think the second is look at leagues, look at networks, and look at other places. I other think, the way the world's set up now with online blogs and opportunities at colleges and the growth of college sports, there's so many ways, the Sports Commission, to get involved and to get experience at the college level before you ever apply for jobs. And you can talk about those experiences rather than saying, as Tom said, I've been a fan of your team for all these years and following TV. I went to Wash U. I interned in the athletic department. I did a marketing study, at the business school on St. Louis sports teams. I wrote a paper online. I think you have to demonstrate, your capabilities so that the team can look and say, this is what differentiates you, and get a projection of what you're going to be versus I'm passionate.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Operating Officer of the St. Louis Rams, Kevin Demoff. The President of the St. Louis Cardinals, Bill Dewitt III. And St. Louis Blues owner, Tom Stillman.
And Tom Ackerman from KMOX Radio. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. We really appreciate it. Have a great weekend. And go Rams, Cardinals, and Blues. Thank you, guys, so much.